For those of you who are watching this on video, you may notice that there's a monkey on my shoulder. If you're listening on the radio, you wouldn't know that, but the monkey is here for companionship, and we're all social isolating, and because we're going to talk in this segment with our good friend Nathan J. Robinson about the fact that an animal, well, I'm going to let him explain it, but are animals pointless? And if so, is that a bad thing? And we'll talk about whatever else we want to talk about. So first of all, Monkey, are you ready to talk with Uncle Nathan? Okay, good. Okay, so we're going to talk, for those of you who might not know, those few remaining who might be unaware, Nathan J. Robinson is, of course, the author of several books, the latest, Why You Should Be a Socialist, and he is the editor and publisher of Current Affairs magazine. And among the pieces he's written recently is one entitled or headlined, Animals Are Pointless and We Should Be Too. So Monkey, don't take that the wrong way. And perhaps, we'll talk to you a little more later. But in any event, and without any further ado, Nathan J. Robinson, welcome back to the program.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you and your monkey, which I notice you haven't named. You have no name for the monkey?
Well, I've only known him for about 4 minutes.
Okay.
Or her, but I'm open. Got any suggestions? Perhaps we should.
No, I haven't. I have no suggestions, but I would suggest that you socially distance from the monkey. This seems to be a violation of COVID protocol right now, the intimacy with the monkey that is being demonstrated here.
Well, he hasn't been to any COVID hotspots in the last 14 days. He's not running a fever.
He looks a little crazy, though. He looks like something's going on with him.
Yeah. Troy, maybe you want to let him play outside for a while. But Nathan, welcome. And I love this piece on this notion of, first of all, I also saw perhaps one of the things that triggered this piece, which was the commentary a little while back from Ezekiel Emanuel, MD. But I'll let you explain the piece before I go any further. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, this was actually a couple of years ago, but it resurfaced because Ezekiel Emanuel, who is now one of Joe Biden's health policy advisors, he's a brother to Rahm Emanuel, the infamous, and was, I think, a policy advisor to Barack Obama, wrote a piece in The Atlantic a few years back called Why I think it's Why I Don't Want to Live Past 75. And the piece made an argument that essentially said, it said first that living past 75 is generally miserable. Once you're past 75, your life is just a decline. And he also suggested that 75 years was enough years. And there are parts of it where he said, well, once you're over 75, you're essentially not useful anymore. The life that you live, even if you are technically healthy, you are not contributing. Your sort of contributions are outweighed by your costs. You're a burden on people. He didn't say you should die, but he did suggest that after 75, his plan was to just not take any medication, not try to keep himself alive any longer. And in a follow-up interview a couple of years later, he said, someone would have said, well, what if you just enjoy your life after 75? What if you're just having fun? And he said, well, when I see older people, they're just living frivolous lives. They're riding motorcycles, they're having fun, but they're not producing anything. And he suggested that your creative capacities and your productive capacities go down. And so my article was kind of a response to this because I think it captures a lot about the prevailing ideology that I detest.
Well, I mean, I'm curious to know why you were moved to write it in late April, because, of course, and I've written a bit about this, more than a bit, many words, probably too many, about the pandemic and the notion of herd immunity, and basically the idea that we should let a lot of old people and disabled people die because then younger people will be more likely to develop immunities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But you really are not leaning on the pandemic pedal here in this piece. You're basically saying, but I wonder if that was a trigger in any way.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it was in some ways related. I mean, it is part of the conversation right now is because especially on the right, you hear that because COVID affects old people disproportionately, oh, we need to isolate the old people and let all the young, vigorous people go back and enjoy society. There was a writer for The Federalist who just got in trouble or just got a lot of blowback because she said that you can call me grandma killer if you like, but I'm not going to sacrifice my trips to the zoo, my trips to restaurants, just to save some old people. And I find that very disturbing, but I think there's something I think we need to understand sort of why it's disturbing, and it's more than just conservatives during COVID. And Ezekiel Emanuel's essay seems to capture the bipartisan nature of some of the assumptions in here, which is to say, the assumption that life has value in accordance with your productivity, which was pretty explicit in Emmanuel's essay, was this suggestion that the reason that living while you're old, the reason why he considers you a parasite or a burden is because you're not producing. And that is you hear that so often. In fact, oftentimes when people on the right say, oh, the economy is fair because people get paid and rewarded according to what they produce. The response from liberals, the critique will be, no, the economy is not fair because people don't get paid according to what they produce. Now, that is true. That's empirically correct. But also notice that both parties are sharing an assumption that being paid in accordance with what you produce is what's fair. But there's a kind of eugenic or social Darwinist kernel of thinking there, which says that it's okay to use your production as the measure of your rewards. But I don't think that's the case, because I think all life has value. And we don't say that because you're sick or disabled or old and you can't contribute to the economy, you are therefore less worthy of living a satisfied life and having access to the good life.
Unless we're Ezekiel Emanuel, in which case we do say it. And
Yes.
And by the way, Nathan J. Robinson, you do point out the irony of a guy who thinks that people are useless after 75 supporting a 78-year-old presidential candidate. I thought that was a good point. But, it also struck me, and then we'll get back to the age dimension of it and the animal dimension of it, but it also struck me that what you're describing here about, this bipartisan sense that you should be measured on your contribution, your productivity, your contribution to the economy, is the flip side of what's bothered me about bipartisan education policy assumptions for so many years, including, Obama's 2012 platform and I think Hillary's 2016 platform, as well as the Republicans. I mean, Obama's and Romney's education platforms looked almost identical. And one of the things that all these people keep saying is, we need an education system that prepares people for the jobs of tomorrow.
Prepares you for the job market.
It never says, we've lost the sense we need to create citadels of learning and knowledge where people can explore the beauty of knowledge and enhance it and contribute it and add to it, and learning and teaching for its own sake, not to mention the arts, and so on. It's like, no, F poetry and painting and sociology and history, and no, let's just make sure that everybody knows how to be what Robert Reich in the 1990s used to call a symbol manager or symbol manipulator, whatever you want to call it. Let's make sure that people are ready to, operate robots that are building. It seems to me it's the same thing, that we're losing a sense of the inherent beauty of the tangible, which is life, of the potentially intangible of the arts and of the mind, and that this is a poverty of the spirit.
Well, RJ, you're completely right. And let me tell you
Thank
why
you.
you're right.
Okay.
I wrote a review a couple of years ago of a book by a libertarian economist called The Case Against Education. And the point that he made in that book was the education system does not provide useful job skills and training, therefore it's worthless. But what I was really interested in was there was a liberal critic who hated the book and said, no, the public school system is very important, it's very good. And the argument that the liberal critic made was, no, in fact, the school system does a great job of doing these things. And the disciplines that you deride, like history and like sociology and like theater, actually, sociology can prepare you for a job in this way, and history can prepare you for a job in that way. But again, you have this shared assumption, this language that says that the units that we measure value in are market value. And so you can make a case for sociology, but only if you can make the case that it does, in fact, improve your employment prospects, your job skills, what have you. And the critique that I made was, I don't care if it has value in that dimension. And that shouldn't be the argument we made. And in fact, the fact that this is the turf on which the debate is being had is what leads a lot of colleges to cut funding for the useless departments that don't give people access to high-paying jobs, and what means that colleges focus more on seeing the student as a customer who's trying to get a valuable degree. And I think this whole way of thinking is so dangerous, because it produces a society that doesn't value any knowledge that doesn't have cash value. And it comes out of, there's this wonderful book, The Value of Everything, by Mariana Mazzucato, where she talks about how the concept of value in economics changed over time, to the point where market value and abstract value became, price and value kind of merged. And it used to be that price and value were considered very distinct things. And in fact, the joke about economists were they were someone who knows the price of everything and the value of nothing.
Right.
But in fact, that became quite literally true, in that we lost the language to talk about the value of things. And I talk about animals in this way, and you can talk about education in this way. We don't really have ways of talking about the value of things that outside of an economistic framework.
And there's so much I want to explore about that. And again, we're talking with Nathan J. Robinson of Current Affairs, and so much more. And I guess part of that has, I wonder if it's that we don't have it, as in we never had it, or whether, to what extent it's we don't have it anymore, but we used to have it. And I guess that depends. Our society is made up of many different segments and so on. But it seemed, and maybe I'm over sentimentalizing and picking up on, sort of Rousseauian nostalgia for what never existed. But it seems to me that there were periods in human history, at least in segments of societies, including our own, where people were like, yeah, animals are beautiful. This guy is beautiful. Old people or other productive, let them sit, let them enjoy. It seems to me that this is a new-ish phenomenon, but I have absolutely nothing to back up that statement with.
Well, I mean, I do think that there are a lot of historians of the Democratic Party who have at least suggested that the language of business and the language of Friedmanite economics, neoliberalism, really did infect the party's rhetoric and its platform over the course of several decades, right? So if you look at the history told in Thomas Frank's Listen Liberal, for example, it does kind of show you how this way of thinking, where there used to be more sort of liberal rhetoric, was values-based, rights-based, New Deal, Great Society rhetoric, and how that changed a lot to a kind of technocratic language, a kind of maximizing our productive potential, framing what seemed to be the same policy goals using kind of more bloodless mathematical economistic language. I think that was, as I understand, a real shift. But doesn't really matter whether it was a shift or not, because the fact is it's horrifying either way. So either way, we are in a point where we need to learn to make the case for things without invoking these kinds of values. And you can see it in a lot of places, right? You can see it in every time you argue. I always see it in prisons, because the work that I started doing a while ago when I was in law school was criminal justice reform work, and you see a lot there of like framing things like introducing education for prisoners in terms of the value created, right? Ultimately, it will reduce recidivism, which will save the state this much money. Right. But of course, if you think in the terms that those of us on the left do, where education is a fundamental human right, the fact that it saves the state money is a bonus, but that's not the reason for doing it. You do it because prisoners are people, and people deserve access to education, and that's fundamental. You can't take it away from them. And this is the same way we should talk about old age. We should talk about the rights that people have. We should not. There would be this temptation to say, "Oh no, actually, we can quantify the value of elderly people to a society, and it's this." And if you go back to Ezekiel Emanuel on those terms, if you argue against his math, and you say, actually, like, they make lots of contributions, I think that's a mistake. That's the kind of temptation. But what we really need is rights-based language that doesn't measure people quantitatively, but says that because a person is here and because we care about them and because they have dignity, they have certain entitlements that come with that. And those are the things that we're fighting for. We don't need any reason beyond that. And I talk about animals in the same way, right? Animals, wild animals, you don't want to make the case for their instrumental value. They have a right to pursue their lives. It's not that they have some utility to us, that if they satisfy that, then they get to live.
So Nathan J. Robinson, several thoughts come to mind in that. One, utterly random, was for some reason what popped into my mind was Bill Clinton and Al Gore's campaign slogan in 1992, "A bridge to the 21st century." It just popped into my mind. What's the rush? Take the back roads. It's more scenic and you'll get there sooner or later anyway. But that is random. The other, it was, you start out with the image of ducks. They don't do much all day. They float around, they eat, they quack, they brew. And it seems as if our modern sensibility is kind of like, I picture Tony Soprano or somebody saying, effing ducks, what do they do? That's become our ethos, or it remains our ethos. And the third quote is from William Blake, poet William Blake, who wrote, "Everything that lives is holy." And so it seems to me you're talking about both a conceptual and almost, dare I say, spiritual shift regarding, regardless of your own personal theology. You're saying they're here, we're here, older people are here. There are some things that can't be quantified, and the ineffable luminescence of life and existence. What is your goddamn problem that you can't see the value of that?
I love the ineffable luminescence.